So, hi everybody. Welcome to today's Design at Scale Summit. Admo and I have just been chatting, getting to know each other. But really quickly, I'm Amrita. I'm the VP of Marketing at Superside. For those of you who don't know Superside very well, we're a fully remote design company. We help lots of ambitious brands that are growing really fast. We help them get design done at scale in a frictionless, delightful way. Our whole sort of formula is like we try to recruit the top 1% of creative talent from around the world. And then we combine that with design ops tech and this like really battle tested process. And then the benefit of that is of course passed on to our customers. So it's been an interesting ride because COVID has certainly given us and many other companies some tailwinds. So here we are today. Super excited to be joined by 4 amazing speakers. We have 3 amazing sessions today. The first one, of course, is being kicked off by Adam Morgan here. For those of you who don't know him, he is the ECD at Adobe. So big job. He has also authored a book with a very interesting title. It's called Sorry Spock. Any Star Trek fans? Sorry Spock, Emotions Drive Business, proving the value of creative ideas with science. And so I think for those of you who I think like a lot of us in this call are probably creatives, right? So we know emotions. I write copy, for example, every day for our website. And I know like you can be rational and you can certainly talk about like the business value of something, but ultimately you have to tug at someone's actual pain and their heartstrings. And I think Adam is here to kind of educate us on how to do that and how to do that at scale. So he'll be taking us through a great presentation today about the myth behind content creation, how to do it well. But just to kick things off, Adam, just to give context to everybody, can you tell us like how the design organization is set up at Adobe? Like how big is it? Are you centralized, decentralized? What does that look like?
Oh, sure. There's actually, to be honest, 3 design orgs at Adobe. One is the design org that just does in product. So it's all of the product design. Man, we have a lot of products, a lot of software. And then we have 2 groups that do all of the marketing, design and writing and video. So there's one that's over Creative Cloud that handles all of the creative software that you're all probably familiar with. And then there's another one that's the enterprise side of the house that handles all of the marketing software and the marketing stack. So that's the one that I work on, is the enterprise marketing side.
Gotcha.
As far as like the size of the team, here's an interesting thing. I think some people think of Adobe and they're like, oh, it's just a company that's just got hundreds and hundreds and thousands of designers in there. It's actually not, surprisingly.
What? Okay. Why?
We don't. And I think the big reason why is because it's a big tech company and Wall Street really regulates, or at least I don't even know who did it. Some tech company made some algorithm back in the day. And now the ratio of people inside versus the bottom line is highly regulated. So what we do is actually, we have a lot of internal creative, mostly creative directors. And then externally, we partner with, I know it's sad to say, like 400 agencies. So a lot of people that extend our team, because money's not the problem. It's just the head count that's the problem. So anyhow.
Gotcha.
So we have a lot of partners.
That is insightful. Okay, cool. And then just again, quickly, how do you, because I do feel like your job is probably massive and particularly complex. So like, how do you decide to spend your time? Like where does your time generally go during the week?
Let's just say roughly maybe a third of it is working on kind of big brand projects, like whatever the tone and voice is, or a new ad campaign, or how we're going to really be deciding, kind of a high level project that affects, a large part of the brand. Another third might be just working with my managers and people and just kind of people stuff. And then a third is the work. So it would be, reviewing stuff, articles, pieces, whatever it may be. So it's just kind of a variety of stuff.
Okay, cool. And then culturally, have you at Adobe, again, from the outside, everybody admires Adobe, right? Like you guys have figured stuff out. But culturally, I guess, like, do you still have to do a lot of, let's just say, educating around the value of design and how design needs to have a seat at the table, et cetera, given that you're yourself a creative company? Still have to do that?
Oh, and you would think it would be. I thought, oh, if it's a company like Adobe that believes in creativity, I mean, that's like creativity is core value of the brand. But we have thousands of marketers on tons of different products, and they come in from different companies, and so they just have their own set of beliefs and things that they're thinking about. So unfortunately, it's been like a 7-year. I've been for 7 years just. And whenever someone new comes in, it's like, all right, we got to have the talk. We got to talk about creativity and how it's important and why it matters. The good news is, at least at Adobe, we as the creative org own the expression of the brand. I mean, the final words and pictures and things. So it's like all the others are going to come up with the strategy of who we're going after, what are the metrics, all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, we're going to partner with them. And then at least we could say, well, this is what's going on the website. This is what we're going to be, designing, the colors, the images, all that kind of stuff. So it's good that we have ownership of that. So we're not having to fight for that at the table, but we are, I am constantly educating people on what it means to be on brand for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Got it. Yeah. Wow. That's interesting. That's also, I mean, we're going to talk about this theme in particular throughout the summit, actually. So it is kind of interesting to see how even Adobe has somewhat struggled with it. Although I have to say, like, other orgs are way far behind you. I mean, like Superside itself, like, we have a huge design team on the marketing team. And I mean, now I'm kind of rethinking it, but what ultimately gets published or put out there, like, but before we push a button, the marketer who is in charge of that KR makes the final call. And I can see that perhaps you would disagree with that.
I would disagree with that. In fact, there's actually a new model that I'm seeing happening in a lot of companies. Because if you think about I'm going to go off on here for a minute.
That's okay.
If you look at the trend of how it used to be, like, it used to be always centralized. You had the director of marketing, whatever. And then underneath that person, you would have events and all the different functions. And then creative would be a part of that. And that's why for so long, creatives in-house just felt like they were just in the cave and just kind of a service arm, right? And the trend I'm seeing more and more now is that if we truly are in this era of experiences and where it's all about those emotional human connections, and that's the differentiator for business, not just, a better widget. I'm seeing the trend, and thanks to like the design-led movement, which totally opened up the door, at least with innovation on the product design, that gave a seat at the table for creatives. But I'm seeing more and more this other model where you have, like the ECD and then the director of marketing are just partners, and they work together. Yeah, and co-owners. So it's like on the strategy side, you get to run all the analytics and the marketing plans and who are the personas, what are we going after, what are the plans, what are the metrics, all those kinds of things. And then the creative leader is really saying, okay, here's the expression of the brand. Because I will say this, I went and got a master's degree because I wanted to better understand my counterparts on the other side who were more marketers. I went and got a master's degree in integrative marketing and strategy at Northwestern. My sole purpose was just to see what they're being taught on that side of the fence. And I'll tell you 100% amazing stuff on strategy, but they are not taught anything about creative. They're not taught how to, really understand good design or good writing. And so for them to be directing it just doesn't make sense anymore. Like if we're all being specialized, whereas you have creative people who have trained their brains their whole lives to focus on that kind of work.
Yeah.
It just makes more sense to just, first of all, there are a lot of creatives that need to step up and actually learn to understand business strategy and marketing strategy, because they can't have a leadership position without that. But if they do, then I feel like they should be peers and they should work together and then own the expression and then own the plans and just partner together.
Gotcha. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I think there's also like different levels of design maturity that an org goes through, right? And it's almost like, to me, it almost feels like, and I use Superside as an example only because we are a high growth company. We've grown like crazy. And of course, design is super important to us given what we do, but we just don't have the maturity on the marketing team and the processes on the team to equalize that skill set just yet. Because I think for us, like we're still laying the foundation to some degree. But yeah, I think that's a good point that the skill set and the brains are completely different. And so you kind of need both at the table at the same level, calling the shots. So no, I appreciate that very much. I think I think there'll be a lot of audience questions around this, and I have a couple of follow-up questions on this. But let's go through your wisdom, your presentation, and I'm sure like a lot of great discussion will happen after the fact.
All right, good. So anyhow, thank you for the intro and that good discussion to start out. Today, I'm really going to be talking about, and this is the funny thing is it's coming from a creative person, but I'm going to be talking about a little bit behind the scenes of how to make good content and what's really necessary. And that comes from, you'd mentioned my book. That was driven in a large part, like before Adobe, I worked for almost 2 decades in agency life. So exactly where you are. And I had a lot of clients that just didn't believe in creativity, or they were like, okay, we got to be data driven. And then eventually, when like a recession came or there were hard times, they would just push back and say, no, enough with the silly stuff and the fluffy stuff. Let's get back to some real marketing. And I had a big problem with that. So the whole point of the book and some of the content that I'm going to share with you today is how do I prove that creativity is really better for the bottom line, but not do it subjectively? Because it seems like creativity is so subjective in all forms of my career. So this was an attempt to use hard science to prove the value of creativity so that you can go back to the CFO or whoever it is that doesn't believe it and just give them logical steps as to why this is really happening. That's a separate topic. But what I'm going to go through today is just some of these content myths that we have and then how creativity or how other ideas can help push us through. So here are a few myths that we've heard. And I'm calling them myths, even though early on in my career, I would have called them truths. And those are things like, you have to have content above the folder. It's worthless. We've tested, and it absolutely is that's the rule. So make it short. Next is headlines. We got to have headlines. The only way they're going to work is if they're like a few words long. When someone writes a long headline, it's worthless and we can't do that. Or let's make social snackable videos that, nobody watches a video past 2 minutes. So it's a worthless endeavor. Don't do it. These are a lot of the stories that I've been told around content. And it's all around attention span, that people don't have attention span. And I want to get back to that in just a minute. But first, there was a study done in just at the beginning of the pandemic or just before it was about this idea that they were testing. This is the mobile marketing. People will engage with a mobile ad, trigger an imprint, positive or negative, and not move on, right? Like they're saying that in the time that a human blinks, we process and make it take away if you want to read through it. But in essence, they were talking about how, we had all of these ads on YouTube or whatever it is. They're like 15-second spots. We used to have the 30 and the 60-second spots. And then we got all the way down to these, it's like the whole Vine craze of 6 second. And they were saying, nope, all that's wrong. It doesn't matter. It has to be 1 second, because people in the blink of an eye can already make a decision. So you have to have a 1 second strategy, meaning content has to be able to connect in milliseconds, right? And the response is, you've got to make it short. You've got to really, really understand that. And I want to raise my hand and say, hold the phone here. I do not agree with the result of that study. Like they got the data right, but the path they're going down, I think is wrong. And if you think about not just their study, but all those other truths I talked about beforehand, I think they're wrong. But what do you think? Maybe I'm wrong. I'm going to give you my opinion. You can think for yourself. We are so inundated with this this world of snackable content because everyone's attention span is short and everything has to be short and fast and punchy and quick. Otherwise, you're not going to break through and get the attention of your audience, right? So I just want you to pause and think for a minute. Do you really believe that? Do you think in your heart that videos have to be 2 minutes or less, or that everything has to be snackable, that content has to be short, right? Is that the answer? So how do we really get an answer? I'm going to tell you my journey to try and find an answer on this without any subjectivity, without me just saying, well, it feels like it should be this. I told you a little bit about the book. So I went around and interviewed a lot of neuroscientists and read through a lot of really boring scientific studies. And I'm not going to go through a ton of them, but I am going to go through some just to give you some context in a very logical manner as to what really is going on and what we should focus on. Excuse me. Now, the first thing let's talk about is attention span. So the story that out there is that we, used to have longer attention spans, and now we have the attention span that's shorter than that of a goldfish. And a goldfish has an attention span of like 8 seconds. Now, I researched this, and first of all, I don't know where on this unholy planet we got data that we were able to measure goldfish attention span. I don't think it's true at all. I think that's just a story. And the other real truth that I found in reading through on a lot of this is that actually none of us have attention span. There is no such thing as a span of time that we have available to give attention to something. And once that time clocks out, it's over and we can't pay any more attention. We do have attention. We do pay attention to things. There's no such thing as this mythical attention span where it's just a limited amount of time. I'm going to focus more on what we do pay attention to and why we pay attention to things, because attention is really important. But don't think of it in terms of it's this locked numerical number of amount of time or space, and we have to hurry and beat the clock in order to keep people's attention. So here's how I'm going to talk about it first: is how brains consume content and what's going on when they are consuming content. So this is one neuroscientist I interviewed. His name is Dr. Scott Stephenson. He said, when our brain is doing its job at predicting our surroundings, our subconscious is in control. Only when there is an error or something doesn't match our predicted reality does the conscious brain kick in. Only then do we become aware and notice the element that's different. So what does this mean? This means that, let me give you a story. Let's say you're, back before COVID, but you're at work, the day is over, you go home and you get in your car, you turn it on, you start driving, and the next thing you know, you're home, right? It's called autopilot. We just don't even know what's going on. It's just like all of a sudden we're heading out. The way our large brains become efficient, because they do take a lot of energy, is that they only can focus on a certain amount of data, meaning there's so much data. If you think about your senses in terms of data input, your eyes, your nose, your touch, it's all data points, right, coming in. And we can't pay attention to all of it. There's no way. We go crazy. In fact, if you want to get deep into it, like there are more dendrites pointing from our back of our brain forward rather than the other way, meaning we're not a big tube of data input sucking it all in. We only take in a small amount. In other words, the thing that matters the most, the things that makes us pay attention, is an anomaly, meaning something different has to take place. In that driving home scenario, let's say you're driving home, nothing happens, you just make it home, your brain's on autopilot. But if you happen to pass by a crash site, someone got in an accident and there are ambulances, there's a police car, whatever it is, like at that moment, your brain is highly aware because it's totally unusual. It's something different than what you're used to on that drive home. If it's all the normal stuff, your brain's not going to do anything. It's just going to feel like it's shutting down, even though it's still paying attention. But when there's something different, something unusual, so of those millions and millions of pieces of data that we're taking in constantly, if you think of think of pixels in your eyesight, like millions and millions of pieces of data, we're collecting them all, and it's going to be ignored unless we pay attention to it. And if you don't pay attention to it, then it's gone. So that's really, really critical. The big takeaway, and we can dig in deeper, but I'm going to kind of gloss over this, is that attention span isn't something that's shrinking like a goldfish. Attention is only given to things that we pay attention to because it's different, meaning an anomaly. So takeaway is, the things we pay attention to are anomalies. If you want to go read the book, Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath, they'll talk about a bunch of different categories like news, something that's unusual, something's different. Like those are all anomalies. Things that make us, the things that stick are things that are unique and stand out. So number one lesson, remember that, an anomaly. The only way you're going to break through is not because of time and space and speed. It's because of an anomaly. Okay. Next, I want to talk a little bit about how we make decisions. So let's first start out like a normal brain moment. So first of all, let's say you walk into your kitchen and your stove is on fire. There are big, huge orange and red flames, and it's just this fire. Like instantly, you're going to make a decision. The way that works is your brain is going to do it's like you're going to go back to your file structure, right? Through all your old folders. And it's going to do a quick cross analysis of everything on your hard drive in your brain and see if you can find a match. Like, do I know what this is? This is, what is this thing? And you'll find the folder that says fire, and then you'll quick have a match, and your brain will send a response back through an emotional response. Basically, like the way we work is we have these long spindle neurons that go around, and it's very unique to hominids, but it'll do a short little burst of dopamine or serotonin, some neurochemical. And those little bursts of neurochemical are really emotions. Like those are the emotions of our lives, right? So it's like that controls all of our feelings of love and happiness and hate and anger and pride. So even a small little fluctuation in dopamine can instantly make us alert of like, all right, this is what's happening. So in that instance, you found a match. Yes, fire is bad. Put it out. Like you're going to have an emotional response to that very, very quickly. But what happens if we don't have a match? Let's say you walk in your kitchen, and instead of seeing orange and red big fire, you see a green and purple mystical fire that's glowing on your countertop. Right? That's a new experience. You've never had that before, and you don't know what to do with it. So as you quickly go through your file structure, you're like, okay, I've never dealt with this before. What do I do? When that happens, and that's an anomaly, right? That's something new. It's going to go to your, what I call the CEO of our brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, right? The logical function of your brain. And everything's going to slow down. Your slow system is going to kick in, and you're going to logically think it through and be like, okay, what do I do here? I've got to make a new decision. This is totally brand new. Do I stick my hand in this mystical fire and it teleports me to another dimension? Is it just another type of fire? And if I put my hand in there, it'll burn. Like, you're going to have to logically figure that thing out. But once you've made that decision, once you've logically made it, then it's going to go back and burn that memory into your long-term memory, right? Once the conscious brain makes a decision, then we're going to send it back to our subconscious. And the way we do that, the way we create memories is, we have like all of our neurons, and there's billions of them, right? And the way that those neurons communicate, like I said before, is at the synapse, at the very end of that, they're just going to put a little teeny burst of neurochemicals. And so if you really think about it, burning a memory trace is really just a pattern that's firing in your brain between or among a certain pattern of neurons, right? So the way we make a memory, we first have to have an anomaly, and then we're going to burn it in through a pattern called a memory trace. And if you think about that in data, it's just like ones and zeros, right? On our hard drives, we make memory ones and zeros. It's kind of the same way in our brains. It's just, is it turned on or off or on or off? And that pattern of synapses of that firing is what sets a memory trace. And so think about that. Like, our brain can hold limitless patterns because we have so many neurons that can fire, but it's really just ones and zeros turning on and off unless they're associated with emotion. So the reality is emotion is critical in making memories. Like, the only way we're going to make a memory is that basically that burst of memory in the pattern. So ones and zeros wrapped in emotion. And it's not just making those memories. Emotions are super powerful in making memories, but also retrieving them. If you have here's the answer. Like, if you have a lot of emotion present when you're making a memory, you'll have a really strong memory trace. If you don't have a lot of emotion present, you'll have a very weak memory trace. So when you go to recall that thing, if there's not a lot of emotion present, it's weak and you can't recall it very well. So I know, like, in media, we like to say, oh, how many exposures do we need to have of an ad? 3 or 4 with a repeating pattern. And the answer is no. If the emotion is strong enough, it could just be once. Just to give a quick example, like, even if it's a traumatic event that's very emotional, you'll remember it forever. I mean, think of 9/11. That's been a while, but I guarantee most of us can remember exactly where we were, who we were talking to, what time of day it was when we found out. Like, that whole moment for me is just surreal. Like, I can just picture it right now, exactly when I found out about that big traumatic moment. And it happened once. So the details are clear to me because it's a strong memory, because there was high emotion present. So one more quote from Dr. Stevenson: when making decision and locking in a memory, emotions are everything. In neuroscience, there's another expression: neurons that fire together wire together. In other words, the more activity you have in that pathway, the more it becomes plastic, and that plasticity, blah, blah, blah. When we make a decision, our brains are flooded with feelings. So that's the critical part. When we have these ingredients, when we have an anomaly, something that stands out, and we have lots of emotion, that is how we make a memory. Those are the 2 most important ingredients. So when we're bombarded with millions of messages out there, I want you to just always stop and think, does that message have an anomaly, and is it emotional? Because that is what will drive engagement. So just pulling back a little bit, there was another study done by this gentleman, Paul Zak, who's known as the father of neuroeconomics, basically neuroscience mixed with money. And he wanted to figure out, like, how can I predict if someone watches some ad or watches a movie or is involved with something, how can I predict based on that interaction if they're going to spend money, right? If they're going to pay money. And he could take people in the lab, and with an 82% accuracy, he could show them something, and he could measure their attention and he can measure their emotion. Attention was through like quickened heartbeat, sweat glands, and the eccrine glands in the skin. And emotion, he ended up measuring the vagus nerve with an electrocardiogram, because then he could see how much, I think it was oxytocin, the brain had released. So basically, by measuring anomaly and emotion, he could tell you with an 82% accuracy rating if someone was going to pay money, right? Like, that's amazing. So while we can't take all of our pieces of content and go, well, I guess we could go hook someone up to, a lab and predict if it's going to work or not. Most likely that doesn't happen, but we can at least still learn that lesson, that what we need to make incredibly important content is that it has to have an anomaly and it has to have emotion. And now, after that, understanding that whole lesson, here's what I want to go back and talk about. It has nothing to do with time, length, or speed. When you think about those myths that we talked about beforehand, those were all about, you got to make the video shorter, you got to make the headline shorter. It's like time, length, speed, crunch it up, first view, because people have fleeting attention spans. That's not it at all. It's all about, are you holding their attention with the right things, an anomaly and emotion? The problem is, far too often in our social feeds, there's no emotion and there's no anomaly. It's nothing new and it's nothing emotional. We let it pass by in a heartbeat. And that's why we start focusing on the wrong things. Now, I'm not saying that that speed or length or time don't have a place. Absolutely. Like, there is a time and a place for all content. This is a pyramid from Northwestern when I got my master's degree, of like talking about the different types of content and the engagement level. And it's really interesting to think, certainly there's a place for social up at the top. Like, social is fast content for sure, but it's not deep content. It's very shallow. People are just going to see it and pass by. And the whole point of that is just to get someone to quickly, with an anomaly and emotion, to care and click, right? Whatever it may be, communities, that's where you're going to get deeper discussions and deeper connections. So if you try and make all your content snackable, you're just living at the surface and you're going to fail. You have to really focus on the whole breadth of content. I'm not going to get to this last one really quick, but there is one more truth that I want to add to the mix. In my experience, also at Adobe Analytics, we touch a lot of data, and so a lot of times up in this point, people will be like, "Oh, that's great. You're talking about touchy-feely crap. Where's the hard data?" Like, we live in a data-driven marketing society. We know what's going on. We don't have to guess anymore, and that is 100% true. I mean, there's some statistic like Adobe Analytics, at least like 70% of all online transactions go through an Adobe server. That's amazing. 70% of online transactions. So whatever you're buying or checking a website or whatever it is, like, we have data on 70% of the internet, right? And we do a lot of studies on what does that mean? What's the best day to fly? What's the best time to get holiday shopping? Like, there's a lot of data we can pull from that. But it's the biggest thing we realize is there is a lot of data fatigue. There's just too much out there. And the reality is, because there's good data and bad data. Like, we've learned that there's two types of data. And it's not all created equal. Some data offers insights and the rest is just counting stuff, and it does us no good. And there's a time and place for that right data, just like that content pyramid. Like, not all data is worthwhile. So here's the data that I think, to me, matters most in this whole content puzzle. And that's that data on its own isn't necessarily valuable in my mind, but the insights are. Like, if you said 20% of people like a certain thing, that doesn't really help me in my marketing. But if you give me the why, if you give me the insight behind it, like, they like that thing because it makes them feel X, that is an insight and that is valuable. And the reason why it's an insight is because it's a human insight. So when you're looking at data, for me, the most important element of all that data is the human insight. So can you sift through all that data and find a why? Can you find out a truth or why someone cares? What I call it usually a trigger. If it's something that really matters to them, then that's the right data. And then that data matters because it's all about the human experience. So even though we are in this world of it's a balance of art and science and data and emotion, it's super, super important. So I'm not a proponent of like, it's all creative, it's all emotional, screw all the data. Not at all. Like, you need that. That data will guide you to your creativity and create better content, but you've got to find the right data. So my final takeaway of all those things is, first, start with those human insights. Get the right data, measure the right data to get to a why. Once you have that, then you can create an experience that has an anomaly and emotion in it. Whether it's nostalgia or it's, pride or whatever that feeling is around the idea, and that anomaly's got to be closely tied to that insight. That is the formula for making great content. So if we go back to this 1 second strategy where they said in, 4/10 of a second, people engage and make a decision. That is 100% true. They got the data right. Brains can engage really, really fast in a millisecond. I mean, think about what I was talking about before of when we're making a decision. All of that content, all that data, that's coming in from like our sight, our sound, our touch. If you really think about it, we are being bombarded with trillions of bits of data constantly every second. And it's biology. Our brains know what to do. Our brains know how to sift through all of that data and find the important stuff. How? By finding an anomaly and something that's emotional. That's what it's going to be triggered on. It's not going to be triggered on something that's just shorter. Just because you get something fast in that gate, I guarantee anything we create is nowhere near as fast a content as everything else our brain is already absorbing right now. And it's not going to pay attention to something that's worthless. So here's what they got wrong. What they got wrong is they said, oh, it's all about time or speed, right? We got to make content that's only a 1 second, or we got to only, attend to something in 1 second, or attention span is fleeting, or we got to make, something that's above the fold. No one will ever go down below the fold. No one will ever reach anything if it's not a short headline. No one will ever watch a video that's beyond 2 minutes. All of these things are false. They're all focused on speed, length, and time. That's not where you should focus your energy. And I guarantee, most of my life, I've been arguing with people about these elements in content instead of focusing on the important ones, which are what's the insight, what's the anomaly, and what's the emotion. If we were focused on that more, then we would create content that, you've been to websites where you've scrolled and scrolled and scrolled and read forever. I have, because it's interesting. It's a story. It's got content that's emotional and an anomaly. Do I read headlines that are longer? There are more context. I'm seeing a growing trend where we're putting 10-minute videos on YouTube because they want deep content. I'm not saying that a short, punchy video or a stinger is not important. Absolutely, it has its time and place. But stop thinking that all content has to be short. Consumers don't have short attention spans. We don't just need, it's not data-driven marketing. We can ignore the rest of it. We need all of those elements. Because at the end of the day, content is about value. Content is our product as marketers, as creatives. It's not the process. We get too hung up on the process of speed, length, and time. And we're too focused on that part. Those elements sometimes drive the content in places it shouldn't. If we just stop and think about that value, what is the value to a consumer? They want content that's going to be engaging, which means it's unique and emotional and is something around a trigger that they care about. That's it. So if you want content that will last, you want content that people will click through, focus on those things instead of speed, length, and time. And I'm off my soapbox. Thank you for listening to that. If you have any questions, you want to reach out, here's my info. There's my email. You can also go to my website. On my website, I have articles. I have, speaking engagements, all that kind of stuff. But the thing that I'm really focused on the last couple of years is this realcreativeleadership.com. It's a video podcast. It's on the website or on YouTube or any podcast platform. But it's all about how to help get more creative leadership for yourself and for your company, because there's not really a good guidebook out there on that. But anyhow, there we are. I am happy to take Q&A now.
Yeah, cool. That was awesome. I love that 82% accuracy thing that you talked about, that they were able to put, I guess, electrodes or whatever, and figure that out. I always wonder if you know the answer. Do big brands like, I don't know, Coca-Cola, Nike, when they launch a massive multi-million-dollar campaign, do they do this kind of testing with their messaging, their images?
It depends on the brand. And here's the sad truth. If we're going to go off on testing so far, if you're familiar with the two different types of thought, there are plenty of books on this, your fast and your slow system, right? There's your emotional system and your logical system. If you think of most testing is done, which is logical. It's a survey, multiple choice, or even a focus group. And in a focus group, the person, they'll say this is more qualitative. So it's we're just going to get deep into it. But people go to a focus group and they are like, oh, I got to answer these questions. This is what they're asking for. They're logically trying to give you an answer to feel smart. And so, to be honest, a lot of testing, and even in our own company, we go and do testing for ads with stupid focus groups, which there are books written on why focus groups are bad news. But we keep doing it. A lot of big companies do it. Now, there are some that don't. I did interview one VP at HP, And he understood the neuroscience behind it in doing testing around your slow and your fast system. We even at Adobe, at one of our summit events, tried to focus on how you measure emotions. With Rana June, she had this company that you could hook people up and watch ads and you could see what their emotions are to it. But it's really, really hard. And so it's like, you've got to pull people out of the testing environment. And I have there's a whole theory. There's actually one done by VaynerMedia, which is awesome, around how you get to real good ideas through pilots and testing before the ad is done. So anyhow, that's a longer discussion, but I would say most are not doing it right. We're still just doing focus groups and surveys, which is not the best answer. I mean, it's okay if you're talking about just message testing in the beginning and getting a pulse, but when you get to actual creative testing, where it's like an emotional experience and you put people in an environment where they're logically reacting to an emotional ad, they're not going to react the same way as they would just in the raw, right? In nature.
Yeah. Yeah. You would even think, like, even in the US, like this election, the presidential election was contentious, and you would think that those, I mean, again, they're sinking tons of money, and it's the future of the country at stake. I wonder if they do this kind of sort of emotional testing. Would be kind of good to get some intel on that.
It's new, but it's new. I've only seen a little bit around it in the last, 5-6 years. So I hope more of it comes out. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's a business opportunity right there for anyone that's listening and paying attention. Cool. And I also loved how you talked about there's good data and bad data. And we've kind of heard that before, right? Like we've heard that ultimately it's the insight that matters, and like we need to understand the why behind it. What is crazy to me, and I don't know if you have any tips for the audience on like how to educate the org around this, Adam, but this is like a ongoing discussion everywhere I've gone, every company I've been at. It's like data, more data, and yeah, let's understand the why behind it. And you end up drowning in data. You end up having data that actually sometimes oppose each other, which is always the challenge. And then at the end of the day, sometimes you're trying to move fast and you're trying to ship something. Any advice on how to navigate that, particularly if you're a sort of data informed company and that's the culture of the company? Like, but any advice on how to kind of navigate that and walk through that?
Yeah, that's a rough one. Because I don't want to like dictate to data scientists the right way for them to parse data, or especially if things are contradicting each other. But I would say, for me, when I talk with researchers, the most important thing is that human insight. Like, I go back and say, I don't care, where they shop or what they're doing. Like, there's so much data we get that is okay to try and build up these personas. But for me, it's like, what do they care about? What is the trigger? What is the emotional thing that they're focused on? Like, do they care about, I don't know, pride of being a parent? Do they care about, a break getting away from family for, a break with the dudes out hunting? I don't know. Like, what is the insight? What do they care about emotionally in a human way? That's what's going to drive better content. And if there are because here's the truth. Sometimes I've had like data where it's like, we've tested this ad and the yellow color is best on the button. We got to go with yellow buttons, right? Or cats. Cats in video are always going to perform better than non-cat videos. And then I would say, well, what's our brand? If our brand is cat videos, great, let's do it. But if it's not, we're not doing cat videos, right? What's right for the brand, what's right for the customer, and then done. Because you can test and get good data on a whole bunch of stuff that is off brand.
Yeah, very true. Somebody made a comment. I don't think it's a question exactly, but Nigel Main says, salespeople sell, creatives create, designers design, but marketers can't market. They have lost their ability because of automation being the golden goose. People buy people, but everybody has stopped. I think he means everybody stopped like thinking about that. People will binge watch Netflix just because stuff is on Netflix and the content is normally rubbish. And I agree with him. I agree with this whole sentiment of like, sometimes we as consumers consume things because at some point that brand had established themselves and you trusted them. And maybe now that the quality of that content has gone downhill, and yet we continue binging that. Nigel, if you're on, I don't know if you have a point that you're trying to make or a larger question you're trying to ask, you can type it in the chat if you'd like. But Adam, any thoughts on what Nigel said here?
It's hard. The biggest trick that I've done to combat that, because everyone gets deep into their own silo and they're just focused on, fighting, living in your little space. For me, the best way to combat that is to learn to speak the language of the other person. I think that's pretty critical. I need to learn to speak marketing. I need to learn to speak sales. They're most likely not going to learn creative, first to come to me. But whenever I've learned how their world works and then approach them, kind of like as an olive branch, it usually goes a lot better. And then we can try and create experiences that are more connected. Every time we've done that, and it's like a constant thing. 3 years ago, we redid our website and we really, we're close with sales to try and figure out what people cared about. We did some great stuff. And then it's like we drift away from them for a few years and we don't talk. And so it's just a matter of like trying to speak their language and just really, meet them halfway is usually what helps so that you're not doing rubbish.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, cool. Last question from me. Again, this is just mainly to connect the dots on all the sessions going on today. But do you personally have an opinion on sort of centralizing the design and creative org, decentralizing it, some kind of cross-functional matrixed organization? Any thoughts on organizational design if you could do it all over again from scratch at Adobe?
Again, it depends on the function of design. I feel like, some businesses, they have all design in one central org, like product design, marketing design, whatever it may be. And I feel like that's a little unwieldy. And when an org gets too big, it's not necessarily like, I don't see that it's having crazy value as long as you're still close. But for me, certainly organizing, like, let's say for like all the marketing design or the advertising or the events, all of that stuff in a centralized group, 100%. And even like if you're doing website design, we've had great luck having UX designers sitting on the same team as well. So we feel like we're not fighting against each other. So I would say find where you have the battles between the silos where those are happening, and then you can unite those, and that helps a lot. Or at least just, because I'm never going to say like, I don't want the creative department to go back underneath marketing necessarily, like we talked about in the beginning. And if it's not a matter of like being in the same org, you at least have to have meetings and connect more often. So I don't think there's a holy grail on that. I don't think there's a perfect bullet that'll say like, oh, here's how you're going to stop all problems by putting them under one leader, because when it gets too large, even any leader is not going to be deep in the weeds.
Yeah, no, totally. And then just like one very tactical question, and we grapple with this ourselves at Superside, but like how much, you talk so much about content and the emotional aspects of that, but like just in terms of like newness, how much of the content that a brand produces should be, let's say, brand new? There's a question from Lindo who's asked this, but I think there's a couple other people that asked something similar. How much of it should be like net new, and how much of it is like repurposed, reestablished, perhaps for a different channel or something like that?
Well, I mean, those are two different questions. One's of resources and the other's of reach, right? If you could produce new stuff all the time, you'd be engaging more and more and more with customers, but it's just not financially sound. You have to repurpose. And I'd say, I don't know, there's probably a good formula in there of like, you should have like maybe 25% net new, exciting, push the limit stuff. And 75% is just going to be keep the lights on. And I would say this, like, if it's still working, like if you have an ebook or something that you're sending out and you're still getting leads, great. Putting a little, polish on it so it's not so dated is totally fine. Like it's still new to somebody, right? As long as it's still new to somebody, it doesn't have, like, there's the problem that we always like want to redo everything every single year. And then we change the strategy and we're not consistent long enough. And that's a problem too. So don't go too far to like, go, change if things are still working and there's still a consistency that needs to be met, because new people will be, again, it's your audience. Let's say your audience is constantly new consumers versus if it's like you're a B2B and there's like 10 of them out there, totally different story. So understand your audience and make sure it's new to them, but also balance your resources. I think that's just, you have to do it.
Yeah, that's the reality on the ground. Agreed.
Yeah.
Awesome. Super insightful. People can find you at adamwmorgan.com. Is that right?
Yep. Or realcreativeleadership.com.
Awesome. Okay, everybody. I hope you had some good takeaways from Adam here. Feel free to reach out to him. He's super responsive, one of the nicest guys I've ever met. We were like, oh my gosh, the ECD of Adobe is speaking at the summit. And we were like all in awe. And he's just been so humble and so much humility. This is what real leadership is like. So appreciate that very much. And thanks for being a part of this summit, Adam.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. See ya.